Hello, divas. Welcome back to a deeper dive. Today's special guest, Amy Zubaly, the executive director of the Florida Municipal Electric Association. You know, Tallahassee dodged a bomb, not a bullet. I saw that on social media right after the storm hit just to the south of us in poor Taylor County. They've been clobbered 3 times in the past 13 months. We're going to talk to Amy Zubaly about municipal electrical companies and what they do to prepare for a storm, how you should treat the line workers, and what's in her hurricane kit, okay? So welcome back to a deeper dive with Amy Zubaly. We're going to talk about power.
I think with Helene, the biggest lesson learned is if you are, on a periphery of this storm, even though you are not in that cone of uncertainty, when you have a storm as wide as Helene is, be prepared.
You're listening to Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida. Let's dive in.
110th episode today with our special guest. She is a new G. I hope she becomes a new G. Amy Zubaly, the executive director of the Florida Municipal Electric Association. Welcome to Deeper Dive.
Thanks so much, Dara. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Obviously, the reason that we invited you here today, and thank you for making time for us, I'm sure you're still quite busy, is Hurricane Helene, which is the death toll is continuing to rise from that. We are recording this on Wednesday. I think right now there are 11 deaths in Pinellas County. Our heart goes out to everyone who has suffered from the storm. Poor Taylor County got hammered yet again, 3rd time in, I think, 13 months, in addition to other issues that county is dealing with. So we wanted to have you here to talk to us a little bit about what municipal electrical utilities do. Of course, it's all about me, as all the divas know. I live in Tallahassee. We are a muni. So let's start by having you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us what you do and how you got there.
Sure, absolutely, Dara. So again, Amy Zubaly, I'm the executive director of the Florida Municipal Electric Association, or FMEA. And FMEA is the statewide trade association that represents Florida's 33 municipally owned or public power utilities, as we like to call them. We've got large utilities or larger utilities in the state, JEA in Jacksonville, Orlando, Tallahassee, Lakeland, Gainesville, Kissimmee. And then we also have several smaller utilities in cities like Havana and Chattahoochee and Blountstown over here in the Panhandle, and Moorhaven and Bushnell and Newberry and Alachua. So we are geographically dispersed across the state all the way down to Key West. Key West is one of our members. And we range in size from little ones to big ones. FMEA is, like most trade associations, we manage advocacy, government relations, both at the state and federal levels. We have conferences, events, networking opportunities, communications, information sharing. But FMEA also serves as the mutual aid coordinator for all of our member utilities and serves as the liaison between them and everyone else during emergency response. And by everybody else, I mean the governor's office, the State Emergency Operations Center, the Division of Emergency Management. We work very closely with our national association to activate our national mutual aid, and through them we work with FEMA and Department of Energy and other electric utilities. So we serve both that mutual aid and emergency response coordinator during hurricanes and other critical emergency situations.
Thank you for that. And I think we should probably tell our listeners there's, I think, 3 different kinds of utilities.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Great point. Yeah, there are in the electric utility sector, there's three different types of utilities. Again, municipal electric utilities, which is what my specialty is in and who I work for. There are the private sector or investor owned electric utilities. We call them IOUs, investor owned electric utilities. Those are your larger private ones: Florida Power and Light, Duke Energy, TECO, and Florida Public Utilities, a small one. Those are the ones that Florida has. And then there are also the electric cooperative utilities that serve more of the rural areas in Florida. Up here by us, there you have Talquin,
Hmm.
Bay County, Central Florida area, Swanee Valley, some of the really hard hit ones that have been hit, as you mentioned, three times in the last 13 months or so.
Yeah. So, how does that work when you are? And we'll get into some more details later, but I was just wondering you see all these trucks coming from all over the place. Because we are Muni here in Tallahassee, you named some other areas, and I'd like you to talk about the areas that you serve that are were directly impacted. Do you get help from the IOUs or from the co-ops, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's always a mystery to people, right? I mean, these trucks from all over the country just all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden magically appear. And the answer to your question is yes. That's the short answer. The longer answer is that it really depends on the storm and on the event. On a hurricane, a massive, large scale event like a hurricane, each sector of the industry is first going to rely on their other counterparts. So other public power utilities are going to respond to public power, co-ops to co-ops, IOUs to IOUs. That's going to be the first response,
Mm,
especially in a large event when we're all impacted.
right.
If it's a smaller event where just one or two utilities is impacted, then it's Florida first. We reach out to our other industry partners in the state and we help each other out. We coordinate very, very closely together. I'm on a daily call every day with my counterpart at the co-ops and each of the investor and utilities. So we work closely together. We work, make sure that all of our needs in Florida are met, that there's any unmet needs that we can assist each other with. So we've got a great working relationship. But in a situation like a hurricane, several days in advance, as that cone of uncertainty starts narrowing in on an area, those utilities, and again, I'm going to speak on my members here,
Sure.
but so my members and for Helene, I can kind of focus on Tallahassee because for a while that eye of Helene was set on Tallahassee, right? I mean, we thought this thing was coming right through downtown Tallahassee, and so several days in advance of Helene, they said, okay, here's what we're thinking we need to bring in for extra crews to help assist us. And this is just what we want to plan for before the storm. Once we see how bad the damage is and what it makes landfall as, we will probably need more crews. And so at that point, I have a random number, let's say, 300 personnel or whatever that number may be, and I know that all of my other utilities in Florida are going to hold on crews. Nobody in Florida is going to send crews up to Tallahassee because we know how unpredictable hurricanes are. We
Mm,
know how much they can shift at the last minute. We know how wide they can be and how destructive they can be in different areas. And Helene was a great example of that. It was wider than the state of Florida was. So I didn't have any of my own utilities in Florida that said, "Hey, I can come now." They're all waiting and watching. And similarly, so was the rest of the Southeast. Alabama, and Georgia, and Tennessee. At that point, were all kind of waiting and holding. And some of those Western Carolinas utilities were also waiting and holding because they didn't know if they would have any impacts or not. We know what the outcome was. We certainly know they did. They didn't expect it from this storm. So, given that scenario, in order for us to secure mutual aid resources, we kind of had to go farther out, beyond states, beyond those areas. And so, my national association, I activate the mutual aid network through them. It's the American Public Power Association. They represent the more than 2,000 public power utilities across the country. We activate a call within all of our mutual aid coordinators. So there's a me in all of those other states and regions,
Mm-hmm.
and we all jump on a call together and start polling our member utilities in the state to find out what types of resources, line workers primarily, we would have available to send.
Mm.
And so for this storm, Tallahassee had secured line workers from Lafayette, Louisiana. Lafayette, Louisiana seems to always come to our rescue. We seem to be each other's first responders because if they're hit, we aren't. If we're hit, they aren't. So we
Uh-huh.
always have Lafayette here. We also had secured some resources from Missouri and Arkansas, and then from Ohio and Pennsylvania and Kentucky and Michigan. All of those were secured in advance of the storm in Texas. I forgot about Texas. We had some from Texas as well
Hmm.
that all were ready to come in and were pre-positioned in advance of the storm so that as soon as conditions were safe for those line workers to go out, they could deploy and begin doing assessments of the damage. Now, we all know Helene shifted in those final hours just before it made landfall, and there was really nothing short of a miracle in Tallahassee of what happened for Tallahassee. The unfortunate side was the Taylor County area, who, as you mentioned, it was the third time they were hit in 13 months, and the devastation in some of those areas is just awful, awful. And because of that shift, it put more of my peninsular utilities, particularly in the north central and northeast part of the state, more at play. So areas like Williston and Alachua County, Gainesville, even Jacksonville, they all got pretty hard hit. And so at that point, Tallahassee, while they still were hit and had substantial impacts, it wasn't as much as a direct hit would have been. They were on the western side of that storm. So as soon as they were clear, a few days after the storm made landfall, we were able to shift those resources to other areas
Mm-hmm.
that were harder.
Yeah. So I have a couple questions about that. When you say prepositioning, I'm always curious, where do they go? Like, where do they're coming from north, they're coming from west. Do they hang out in Pensacola? Do they wait? It's dangerous to wait in peninsular Florida because we've seen what's happened before with that. Where do they position themselves?
It depends on everyone's comfort level for that matter. There are some utilities that come on into the state and are in secure hotels or within the utility itself who have
Oh.
high rated facilities.
Mm-hmm.
Others prepositioned nearby. This one was coming up into Tallahassee, so Pensacola, Alabama border, or Mississippi, depending on where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
They would stage wherever they are comfortable nearby that they feel like they'll be out of harm's way, and then monitor the storm from that position and come in once conditions are clear.
You mentioned Gainesville and Williston, and I heard that Gainesville got hit really hard, like harder than expected. What's going
Absolutely.
on in Gainesville right now?
So as of right now, they are wrapping things up.
This is Wednesday. This is Wednesday, October 2nd, when we're recording this, just FYI.
Yeah,
So by the time
yeah,
people hear
so
this on Sunday, they'll probably be done. But
yeah, absolutely. They'll be done by the end of the week, by Friday the latest, and maybe even earlier. They were really hard hit, and Gainesville is similar to Tallahassee, but there's an awful lot of trees in the Gainesville area. City of Alachua, the same thing, an awful lot of trees, and yes, they got much harder hit than anticipated. That little jog to the east, while it was favorable for Tallahassee, was not so favorable for Gainesville. The last statistics I had from them, they had well over 100 broken utility poles, and this is just within the city, of Gainesville itself. So this is not a broad area; it's a small,
mm-hmm.
defined area. And they have crews there from Lubbock, Texas, and they have
Wow.
a multitude of our own Florida Public Power utilities there: Orlando, Kissimmee, Lake Worth Beach, Leesburg, Stark, several others that are there assisting. So I think this morning, the last I looked, they were down to about 400 customers out,
Well, that's not bad.
and they're finishing that up. And it's just some of the hardest hit areas. And
Yeah.
as you get into an area, you get some poles put back up and wires put back up. And once trees get cleared, you realize there's more broken power poles. And you can't get into to fix the poles and the wires while there's still a bunch of debris and trees around.
Of
And so all that
course.
has to get taken out of the areas first. And it takes a lot of time, and you want to keep everybody safe. Safety is number
Yeah.
one priority, and the last thing we want are any of our line workers getting injured on the job. And so safety is paramount, and you just want to, there's a process involved. You get critical infrastructure facilities restored, and priority restoration, you restore customers
Yeah.
on the basis of what you can
There
bring
we
up to
go.
your
Yeah, I love
first.
this when this happens, because when you start answering the questions before I ask them, then I know that the interview is going well, at least by my standards. So, welcome to Deeper Dive, and thank you for doing this, because you're segueing right into, and I'll set it up a little, because I live in Midtown and it's all about me, me, me. Everybody who listens to the show knows that I lived in Indian Head during Hermine. I had a tree come through the roof. I was without power for almost 2 weeks. It was over 10 days. And then I saw one of these linemen in a truck on the street, and people lights on next door, couldn't figure out what was going on. The tree, I did not know this at the time. The guy came and showed me when it hit the house, the back wall of the house, it pulled out the whole electrical box. So I had to get an electrician. It was that long before we had power restored. And thank you to Governor Scott, whose staff and came over and brought me ice and food. I'm insulin dependent diabetic, and so refrigeration is critical, and I don't have a generator. Now I live in Midtown. I live in the Lafayette Park area. Sorry to be boring all you divas with this, but I'm getting to a point. Generally speaking, when it rains hard or it gets windy, our power goes out. I'm a couple blocks from TMH, from the hospital. 2 days, literally 2 days before the storm, the Tallahassee electrical folks came and put new poles up on my street. And we did not lose power at all during Hermine, which was just kind of nothing short of miraculous to me, because the folks one street over did. So this is all a very long, selfish lead into the decisions that are made about who gets their power restored first. Maybe you can tell what the secret sauce is.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm jotting a couple notes down so I don't forget a couple points that I wanted to make.
Yeah, it was I did a long riff. Sorry.
No, that's okay. And let me touch base on a few of that. First you mentioned Hermine,
Yes.
and that, you had damage to your side of your electric meters. And, unfortunately you didn't realize that at first, which is what prolonged your outages there. When we restore power, and I'll get to those priority restorations here in a minute, you'll hear terminology that a utility will say, we can only, let's say there's 2,000 customers still without power. Maybe there's 300 of those 200 customers that cannot safely receive power. When you hear a utility talk about that, that means that those 300 customers in that example I just used were like you. They have damage to their side of the meter. So the meter that's on your house, that's your responsibility. That's not something from the electric utility. And so they can only restore power to those areas that can accept the power. And so sometimes there's uncertainty, like it was with you and Hermine, that I didn't know that I couldn't take the power, even though that area was restored.
Is it
So
just me, or do other people do that, or was I just like the only stupid
Oh
person
no,
who?
you're not. That's a message point that we certainly try to push out, particularly during events or during storm season. And the more hurricanes that we've gotten, and we certainly have had our fair share the last 7, 8 years of them. Those are messages that we have coordinated with our local governments and our county governments and the state on, to have them assist in sharing those messages. And I think that more and more people are aware of that now. We had a long lull of hurricanes there for a while. We were really fortunate. And so You know, 2016 is when things kind of started and changing, and that was when Hermine was, and now we've had just a slew of them. So those message points and communicating out those messages are something that we've partnered with the state and local and county governments on to help us spread that word. So you know, you are not alone now. People are realizing that, and you know, even door to door type inspections and seeing that, well, you can't take the power. So
Right.
I wanted to cover that aspect of it
Mm-hmm.
first. When you hear a utility say that we cannot safely deliver the power, that's what that means.
Right.
In terms of priority restoration and how that works, so as soon as a storm is cleared out of an area and crews can begin assessing the damage, the first priority is to restore transmission. The transmission are those big, tall, high wires that go from the power plants into those substations. And so they bring the power down to the substation. So if our transmission lines are down, that means we can't deliver the power into an
Mm.
area. The transmission lines have to get brought up first so that we can bring the power in to the substations, and substations are
Right.
also critical. They transfer the power from the high voltage down to the distribution lines that would feed your house. So those critical infrastructure facilities are going to be first, because if we don't have those restored, we can't deliver power to anybody else.
Got it.
Once we get our transmission and substations up, and we're starting to look at our customer base, both households and businesses and industries, our first priority is going to be hospitals and other emergency responders.
Mm-hmm.
And so GMH and the Tallahassee Memorial Regional, those are going to be our very first ones. Other critical infrastructure or critical areas and first responders, police and fire, those areas are deemed priorities. Cell towers, if we need power to cell towers or other state
Mm.
emergency operations center, those are going to
Mm-hmm.
be high on the priority list. And so those will get restored first. Once we have all of those high priority locations like first responders, medical facilities, places like that, we will begin restoring power to areas that we can bring the most amount of customers on first.
So density.
So yeah, so if we have a neighborhood that has 3,000 customers within a circuit and one that has 100 customers, we're going to do the one that has 3,000 on before we get to that one with 100 customers.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get to the end of a restoration, you're looking at areas that live in more rural areas or more remote
Mm-hmm.
areas, on side streets that maybe there's only 4 or 5 houses on, and those take a while because you are looking at fewer customers and a lot of poles and wires to get
Mm-hmm.
that restoration done
You want to get
first.
the biggest bang for your buck. I mean, not
That's
literally,
right.
but you want to prioritize getting as many people back online as possible first. So, fortunately, the houses in my neighborhood are pretty close to one another. They're on smaller lots, and I think we are pretty densely populated in Midtown. And we're also close
Even
to the hospital.
new power poles go in. Florida is our electric utilities in Florida across the board just do outstanding work, and every power pole that's replaced is a hardened power pole. Whether
Is
it's
it? See, I was going to
711
ask because I was asking the linemen when they were doing that. I'm like, you're doing this now? There's a storm, this massive storm, coming in a day or two. And they said, well, maybe this should help you keep you from getting your power out. And I was quite skeptical, Amy. I have to concede, I have to confess that I was very skeptical. And I mean, we flickered twice. I don't know. Was it the new power poles? Maybe. And so tell me how that hardening. And then I wanted to talk about underground and
Yeah,
what.
it could be. Again, Tallahassee was fortunate,
Yeah,
first and foremost.
that's true.
We really, really were. But they were. If Tallahassee had not been hit with, we had impacts from Debbie. We had the awful tornadoes back in May.
That's
We've had
right.
impacts from Australia. We've had, time and time again, we've had impacts from many storms. Tallahassee is extremely prepared, but across the state, all electric utilities have hardened their systems, meaning they do regular pole inspections. And as they
Hmm.
see wood rot or aging poles, they're replaced out with stronger
Okay.
poles, either with concrete poles, ductile iron, or a stronger wood pole. And every pole that's replaced is hardened.
Right.
Undergrounding is going on, and we can talk about that in a little bit. You mentioned the hospital here in Tallahassee by
Mm-hmm.
TMH.
Mm-hmm.
There is right by the hospital, if you see it off of Centerville Road, there is a substation. It's walled in, but that substation also has a small power plant tied with it. That
Hmm.
was an improvement and a hardening that Tallahassee did several years ago. They put a small power plant basically there that if in a critical situation like a hurricane and that we're looking at prolonged outages and being able to restore that hospital, there's a small power plant tied to a substation there that they can ramp up to immediately provide power to that hospital. It's a distributed
That's on
generation
Centerville?
system.
I thought that was on Miccosukee because there's something that looks like that on Miccosukee too.
It's on Centerville, right near just a little, what would that be? East of Benton Road,
Right.
pulling in off of,
I know where you
yeah,
mean. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we do we've hardened facilities across the board. We've put on these, what you want to call self-healing technologies, onto power lines, trip savers, so that, let's say, if a branch or something falls on a line, it can be detected back at the control center, and that power can be diverted around that. And so
Huh.
these technologies are being implemented across the state by electric utilities, and all of the efforts that the utilities are working on and all of the improvements that they've made are paying off.
Wow.
Restorations are going faster. There's less customers being impacted. If you look at the storm today versus the storm back in 2016, it's less customers impacted and faster restoration.
We'll be right back with Amy Zubaly, Executive Director of the Florida Municipal Electric Association.
At Tampa Electric, we're proud to provide 99.9% service reliability in blue skies and gray. We're modernizing our grid to increase resilience for the families and businesses that depend on us every day. Year-round, we harden our system against extreme weather by burying power lines, maintaining line clearance, improving substations, and upgrading systems to restore power faster. Because the work we do now means reliable power for a bright future. Learn more at tampaelectric.com/reliability.
And we're back talking about power with Amy Zubaly, the Executive Director of the Florida Municipal Electric Association. We were going to talk a little bit about underground versus above ground. What are the advantages and disadvantages other than obviously expense?
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad you brought that up, and there are just that. There are advantages and there's disadvantages to it. Undergrounding is not an end all for no outages by any means. First of all, most electric utilities, and again, at least with my members, new neighborhoods that are going on, when you have new development and you're putting them in, facilities are being put underground.
Mm-hmm.
We're able to do that then. There's nothing there. You're not having to tear up existing facilities to put them underground. Areas that are not currently underground, you look at, Indian Head Acres here in Tallahassee, again, how many trees they have. And to underground a neighborhood like that, it's incredibly expensive. And that expense would have to fall on customers. So there'd be, big expenses tied with that. It would result in a lot of those existing trees being torn up or torn down. It's not a simple or easy or quick process. It takes a long time to do that. And then that said, undergrounding areas, when you look at some of the flooding that
Right.
occurs in some of these areas. The flooding doesn't do well with some of these underground facilities. And if you do have underground facilities and there are trees nearby and the trees get toppled, those roots pull up those underground cables.
Oh.
So unfortunately, on that end, those underground facilities in that type of a situation take a lot longer to restore than
Huh.
overhead lines would, because you're
Okay.
having to dig up big areas. You can't see where those faults are like you can, where you can see the power poles down and you can see the lines down if it's above ground.
Well, I'm learning
So
a
when
lot
outages
today.
do occur on underground
Yeah.
facilities, they take a lot longer to restore.
Okay, well, that is really good information. I did not know that. I think you did this, but let me ask it more directly. Walk us through the process. We're getting all the warnings for a storm. Helene is massive, days to prepare. What goes on behind the scenes?
Yeah, so the first thing they're doing, they're making sure that they're communicating with their customers. We want to make sure that all of our customers know, and again, there's a storm coming, but what they can expect. They can expect power to go out. It's going to happen, even in areas that are underground. My neighborhood's underground. My power went out. Right?
Right.
It's not an end all on
Let
things.
me ask you, let me stop you and ask you about that because I think back during Hermine, there was, first of all, when you're communicating in advance of a storm, you have the advantage of all the cell phones or towers are still working and people are able to get messages. I think it was Hermine, it might have been a different storm, but there were criticism of city leaders that they weren't communicating enough with residents about power outages and now we get a lot of messages, when it storms. And I have, trauma, storm related trauma is real. I have talked about it before. It is real. I get very anxious when it rains hard now after my Hermine experience, let alone folks like Michael or the folks in Taylor County after. I can't even imagine psychically what they were experiencing when Helene
Yeah.
was coming. I can't. Even if they're not there on the ground, just it can be debilitating, that degree of anxiety and trauma and PTSD. But the communication, people I'm on sometimes you see people saying like, "Oh, they said it was a big thing. They're hyping it. It wasn't a big thing." How do you strike that balance? How do you thread that needle? I love getting lots of messages. Let me just say, I'm not trying to give any indication that I think we're getting too many messages. I think the more information, the better. But is that something that the utilities have to balance, or is that something that they have to measure? How much information is enough and how much is too much?
No, I personally think over communication is not a problem. I really do. When we look back at Hermine, and I know that there were some criticisms on communications. First of all, Hermine was 8 years ago,
Right.
and every storm that comes through, and including Helene, brings about new lessons learned. New challenges or new lessons learned. We continue to improve across the board. But prior to Hermine, it had been quite a while since Florida had a
That's
large
right.
scale hurricane or a hurricane that had resulted in substantial damage, and particularly Tallahassee. And it was one of the first hurricanes that I think that we all experienced with the age of social media and
That's
how
true.
much communication was going on social media. And traditionally, historically, like back in Andrew and even others, we didn't have social media, right? And we communicated by traditional means. We issued a press release, newspapers
Right.
would pick it up. We would do a press conference with the local TV station,
Yeah.
or an interview, and maybe a radio spot,
Yeah.
both before and during, and that would be the communications. And that has all changed so much. And, if you as a utility or a local government, whomever, are not out there over communicating, that miscommunication starts happening, particularly on social media. You got
So
Facebook
true. So
and X
true.
and then next door apps, and people love to talk, and
Oh my
somebody has
gosh.
followers and they talk and somebody else picks it up. And so we as our membership talk about communications a lot
Mm-hmm.
across our utilities and how important that is And FMEA, our state association, one of the communication tools that we have provided to our members are, pre-ready to go social media messages. So here's a pack of some messages for you
Right.
to communicate out on social media in advance of a storm. Here's some
Right.
safety messages.
Personalize it to your community.
Here's posts just to help,
Yeah.
because when you're in the thick of it, it's all hands on deck, and
Right.
okay, we need to make sure that we're pushing these messages out. And so I don't think that over communication from the right sources is a problem. I'm a Tallahassee customer like you, and I love those text messages
Yeah.
that they send out. I mean, I may know some of what's going on behind the scenes because I'm involved with that utility, but my neighbors tell me how much that they love these
Yeah.
text messages
Yeah.
and communications. They know what's going on. They want to know that there's crews out working. They want to see them. I love looking on Facebook at my other utilities across the state. I mentioned Gainesville right now. I love seeing the pictures of their damage and the crews working and the customers, putting up signs that say thank you to the lineman. I love seeing those visuals.
Yeah.
It just helps to drive that point home, and how bad this damage is and how much they're having to work and how much they have ahead of them in terms of these work. I mean, trees upon trees upon trees, seeing them and having that visual to go with it is so important now. So we've learned so much in these last 8 years and improved our communications across the board.
I did mean to interrupt you because I wanted to talk about the communications and the messaging, but you were talking about, I was asking you to just walk us through prep, response, cleanup. So now we're at the communication stage, and I guess you're coordinating with your mutual partners. I'm not using the right term.
Now a lot of people are getting power restored, right? My members are down to just a couple hundred. I think statewide we're down to only about I haven't looked, maybe about 20,000 or so statewide. So people are getting reconnected. Communication services are coming back up. Those areas that may not have had communications, the state has probably deployed Starlink services. Governor DeSantis and the state Division of Emergency Management Director Guthrie have just done an outstanding job of being able to provide the resources that we all need to recover from this. And so putting out these messages now at this point in time, like you had experienced, if you don't have power, make sure your connections into your house are not damaged. We push out information. We help our customers learn about FEMA recovery, because as local governments, we also have to work with FEMA for recovery from our end as well. And so helping our customers know what to do for FEMA recovery. Those are the types of informations that we're pushing out. If there are still downed lines right now, there's a good chance that they may not be electric lines, they may be comm lines, but as a general customer, you're not going to know that. So don't touch the power lines. That's so important to not ever touch downed lines, because you don't know what types of lines they are, if they're communications or electric lines, and you don't know if they're alive or not. And so continuing to push those messages out to let us know, call up your local utility so that they can verify what those lines are like. Back up into your process, advance of the storm, we're again pushing out those safety messages, what to do. Generator safety is important. We help our communities communicate those messages on how to properly use your generators so that there's not injuries associated with them.
I think that the most injuries associated with storms, at some point, I knew I think it was a data point that most deaths or injuries are generator related. Am I off?
Yeah, I think Helene is a different situation, particularly up in the Carolinas.
No, right.
You are exactly correct.
Yeah.
It's people having the generators too close, either in a garage or too close to open windows or in the house, and that carbon monoxide.
Yeah, that data from Helene is going to change everything, I'm sure, because
sure
I mean, it's catastrophic. Even in Pinellas County, people drowning in their homes. Mostly older folks. When I was looking at some of that data that Sheriff Galtieri released, that is just so tragic. Over on what is that called? Is that the Treasure Coast My daughter lives in St. Pete. I should know. I was just down there in Reddington Shores. The house I stayed in was
Yeah.
destroyed.
Those barrier islands out there
Right.
really destroyed.
You don't have any munis down there, right?
No, not on the coastal areas. I don't. Not on the West Coast. I have
Right.
East Coast, not right
Right.
on the West Coast.
What about now? You mentioned North Carolina. We're looking at these pictures. This is just so dramatic. The flooding and that took place there. Are your members up there helping out, or in Georgia? I guess Augusta got hit really bad too. Are they moving north?
So we have mutual aid crews all over the place. In all honesty, all of our out of state mutual aid crews, as they were freed up from other areas, they were shifted to other public power communities in the Carolinas.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia was prepared
Okay.
well for it. They were expecting a lot of impacts. The impacts just went from one side of the state to another, so they shifted all of their resources.
Oh,
The Carolinas weren't expecting what they got. And so all of our out of state mutual aid resources, as soon as they were released, if all our other needs were met in the state, we sent them up to there. We also sent several crews from municipal utilities to our Florida co-ops to help them out as well. Again, those areas that landfall were so devastated. So we have crews assisting the electric cooperatives. And then if we want to make sure that our mutual aid partners in other states continue to provide us with resources in the future. And so we began just the last day or two starting to send a few municipalities up to South Carolina to help with some of those crews up there and
right.
into Georgia as well.
Yeah.
So again, it's a great example of working cross sector. We have crews with co-ops and investor and utilities right now, and so it's trying to get all the customers restored as quickly and safely as possible.
What do you think is the biggest lesson learned? Is it too soon for a lesson learned from Helene, or what's the biggest lessons learned over the past couple of years?
I think again, every storm brings about different lessons learned, right? I mean, we learned about what to do, how to handle situations when comms are down, and we've
Mm,
improved on that. We've learned on how to communicate with customers better. I think with Helene, and we as a state and our member utilities haven't done their or are doing their hot washes, their lessons learned now, and we FMEA has a conference next month, and that will be a lot of that. Will be
right.
right. It's good timing on that end.
Yeah.
But when you look at the storm in general, I think that the biggest lesson learned is if you are on a periphery of this storm, even though you are not in that cone of uncertainty, when you have a storm as wide as Helene is, be prepared and not to let your guard down. Even in Florida, who would have thought that the northeast part of Florida would have been as severely impacted from Helene as they were? Who would have thought that those barrier islands down in Pinellas County, with it not even coming on shore there, would have been as devastated as they were?
Especially we have so many new people in Florida, right? I'm sure this is something that you all talk about. We have a lot of new residents from other parts of the country who have never experienced storms of these magnitudes. Grew up in Florida. I've lived in Florida almost my whole life. My family home was impacted by Hurricane Andrew. So we've lived through many of these storms. Many people have not. I don't, and I was talking about trauma and the PTSD. I'm hesitant to say this, but you look on social media and you see people saying, "Oh, why is there no chicken? We're not in the cone. I need to cook dinner for my family. Why are people panic buying?" If you have experienced a storm the magnitude of a Hermine and a Dahlia, and Andrew, Michael, you're not panic buying, you're preparing. So stop shaming people who are preparing and respect their experiences. It makes me pretty stinking angry.
Yeah, I would agree. I agree completely with you there. And, I think I've seen some news reports that indicated that Tallahassee was about 10 miles from technically,
Yeah.
have- I mean, that 10 miles, that's nothing of being changed from, from an electric standpoint, losing half their system to losing all their system.
Right.
But, that's huge. And I still have an employee here that lives in Madison County and doesn't have power yet. What you don't want is to people let their guard down. People in Tallahassee, got so fortunate and they have to continue to prepare. And you see those memes on social media where Jim Cantori from the Weather Channel shows up, and the ones that say, "I'll be your tour guide for new residents," and they're funny, and we all chuckle and we all laugh. And it is so important, though, for the people that haven't gone through this. And just because you may have gotten spared on this one, it just they're so unpredictable. I remember Charlie when Charlie came in back in '04. I was visiting my in-laws down in Clearwater,
Oh no.
in Largo area, and Charlie was supposed to come straight in that area. And we were getting their house ready and everything else. And I had little ones at that time. I'm like, let's all kind of take a nap. It's going to be a long night, and we don't know what the night's going to be like. And we woke up from our nap, and Charlie had taken a turn south.
It went in Charlotte. Didn't it go to Charlotte? Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was just in a matter of hours again. And so we just can't let our guard down. And the next one we may not be as fortunate. The next one for Tallahassee could be coming to Bay County and may go east and come in here. We may
Right.
not be expecting it.
What's the longest that you think people need to be prepared to be without power? It can be uncomfortable. For me, I have a neighbor who has a generator. So part of my hurricane prep is I bag up all my insulin and I put it in the fridge. And if I'm without power for more than 24 hours or approaching 24 hours, I just hand the whole thing over to her and she sticks it in her fridge for me. How long do you think people need to be prepared to be without power before they start losing, going ape?
That's a hard question to answer because it depends on the storm and what you're looking at. Being prepared with non-perishables and water for 72 hours is a good rule of thumb on that end. On a major hurricane, being prepared to not have power for a week is
Mm-hmm.
probably a general rule of thumb, although there will be some areas that will go longer than a week.
Mm-hmm.
If you live in a dirt road or in a community
Yeah,
that's out of the way, very rural, it could very easily be much, much longer. If
sure.
you're in a very populated area, maybe it could maybe be a week. So I think it depends on the severity of the storm, how strong of it it's going to be, and where you live. I know that on my end, I probably drive my family crazy because of what I do. And, I pick up every little thing out of my yard that could potentially be an obstacle of
Right.
flying. And I make sure that I've got every water jug filled and everything else. And
Do you have a generator?
I do. I don't have a whole house generator, but we have a portable generator, and at least I don't have a whole house one yet.
Right.
But yeah, I do.
They're spendy.
And I tell my neighbors, they're always knocking on my doors because they know what I do. How long are we going to be without? And
Right.
on this time, I kind of thought that maybe our neighborhood would be back up by end of day Friday, just because I knew how many customers are on that circuit, and
Right.
hopefully by tomorrow night, probably by the next night. I don't want to overpromise things, and I think that that's the biggest thing is not overpromising.
I bet you
And
get inundated with questions about what's going on. Yeah.
yeah.
So, what is in your hurricane kit? I'll tell you what's in my hurricane kit.
Mhm.
So I charge up. Okay. So do you use rechargeable or disposable batteries?
Both. Majority are disposable though, but both.
Okay. I charge up
I,
all my batteries for my torches. I have these
yep.
like, handheld torches. And I have a solar powered weather radio. I have cans of tuna fish and bottles of water. And that's my hurricane and my medications. And that's
Yep.
basically my hurricane kit. So like I'm going to live on tuna and capers, tuna and capers and fizzy water.
I'll buy
Tuna and olive oil, by the way. I like the tuna and olive oil.
We deplete the water going through the winter months and stock back up.
Right.
I charge every device that we own in the
Yeah.
days leading up to it, and we have some of those power.
I do. Yeah, I have those too. I have the power bricks.
And so when we charge our power recliners, we have those recliners that have like the USB ports onto them, and we have battery packs for the recliner.
Oh my God!
A couple weeks. They last a long time, and so that allows us to continue then to charge things on our USB.
Oh, from your chairs.
To have any backup battery packs that we own, computers. Obviously, for me, I need laptop and computer facility. I moved my mom in with us. I moved my 82-year-old mom during the storm, and all of her stuff comes in, and she brings enough food that I think we could feed the street off of.
Right.
And, using post storm, using grills, propane grills, or propane stoves if you camp. You can put pans on those. I have, again, a portable generator, and so I can plug like an electric skillet into something like that, and you can cook a lot of things on those meats.
Right.
Cans of tuna fish, cans of chicken, peanut butter, bread.
Yep. Yeah. If you're feeding a whole family, it's just me and Max here. He's being really quiet today. So,
and pet care is so important. People need to make sure that they've got enough food and medicine for their pets as well.
I heard some of the people in my neighborhood, I was surprised at how many people evacuated for Helene. Were you surprised how many people evacuated from Tallahassee?
Yeah, I was too.
Me too.
Yeah, that's a no. I mean, it was frightening for a while.
Sure. And but I heard about some people who went to the shelter and then with their pets, and then they didn't stay because they had to have their pets in a kennel, and they would have put them in a different room, and they didn't want to be separated from their pets during the storm. So I don't know if that's an issue. We need to get somebody from emergency management to talk about how people can prepare for that. I have a little bunker in my house, so I stayed and felt pretty safe here in spite of my anxiety. But let's get back to more general. So you try to have a couple of fun questions as we wrap up. You said what was in your hurricane kit. I love that you're charging stuff off your recliners. That's just that's hilarious to me. That's a note to self, because I'm looking to redo my living room, so I'm gonna have to put a pin in that. Do you have a routine or an activity for when the power's out? Something that you do I imagine you're probably working, but is there something that you like to do, playing cards or board games?
I'm busy working, unfortunately. So I'm not probably the best one to answer that. Although I know that my mom and my husband and my kids are older. My daughter's already moved on, but moved out. My son, they have gotten cards out before. I've seen them reading. They've got neck lights that they'll put around their necks and read. And so there's a lot of, I think if you've got little kids, getting a pack together of whether it's, simple games and coloring books and crayons and things to draw on and those types of things. Again, that little neck light is a great thing.
That is good.
Put around their neck and shine onto their books.
Do you have an activity like a pre-storm relaxation, something like that you do? Or are you just too busy?
I'm too busy. I mean, seriously, as soon as Florida is in a cone, or well before for Helene, for example, my family was aware of the potential for this storm well before the National Hurricane Center ever made the little yellow blob on the map.
Mm,
My members and as an industry, we watch models from many different sources, and early models were showing a potential system well before the Hurricane Center was making it an official system. Now, those models are not always accurate, and but we were watching it well in advance of that. And so at that point, anxiety levels start going up and you just have to really start preparing. There was one that, was looking like might could potentially be coming behind this one.
yes.
That one's fizzling out.
Yay. Yay. Oh my gosh, that was way too loud.
May not be forming, but again, you can't predict this stuff. And so
Yeah.
given that, as soon as models start having any, at least our state as a bullseye, I am communicating. My office is communicating with our member utilities. We're making sure that they don't have any unmet needs. If there's certain constructions going on within the utility, that they are all alert and prepared, and they're starting the communications with their customers. And my relaxation typically comes in November.
When hurricane season is over.
Hurricane season's over, and I love to travel, and that's I don't plan travel from August through November typically. So mine comes outside of that area.
Right. Well, thank you, Amy Zubaly, the Executive Director of the Florida Municipal Electric Association. Thank you so much for joining us. Before I let you go, those linemen, I guess we can call them linemen and line women, whoever they are, the workers. They are our heroes and our sheroes. And I've seen people doing different things, trying to show their appreciation for them. What's your recommended best way for us to, I'm always like waving at them and, whatever, but what's a good way for us to show our appreciation for those workers?
Thank you. Be patient. First of all, thank you. Holding up a sign that says thank you. Let them do their work. Stay back. Let them do their work. You don't want to put people in harm's way. I know that the people bringing them cookies and all that are great, but let them do their work. Holding up signs or the signs around town where you see on the marquees, thank the line workers.
Mm-hmm.
And, those are great. And just be patient and be appreciative. We know that being without power is stressful. And as soon as we can get it restored, it helps to bring a little bit of normalcy back into lives. And they're working as fast and as quick as they possibly can.
Well, thank you. Is there anything that you wanted to add?
It was a pleasure to be on, Dara. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Amy. I can't wait to have you back again.
Absolutely. I welcome it.
Thanks for listening to Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida, hosted by News Service senior writer Dara Cam and produced by me, Mike Exline. Music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC. To tell us what you like to hear, what you've thought about the podcast so far, or even just to mention how awesome we are, we have a new email address and we'd love to hear from you.
That's right. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcasts@e.newsserviceflorida.com. I know it's a mouthful, but it's podcasts@e.newsserviceflorida.com.